You're listening to the Very Refreshing Podcast with Dylan Hamar and Alek Chetzel. It's delicious. It's very refreshing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 7.
I think so.
Of the Very Refreshing Podcast. Here with Mr.
Alek Chetzel.
I'm Dylan Hamar, and we are here in the beautiful Sunny Skies Media Studio. This is the first time I've said that. We are...
They're not a sponsor. That's just where we are.
Yeah. It's the company I work for. So, okay. Here we are at beautiful Sunny Skies in beautiful Boise, Idaho with our beautiful weather. And we are on episode 7, and we wanted to talk about comedies. This episode is called The Rise and Fall of Funny. And just how comedies have changed over the decades and kind of where we're at currently with comedies. Alek and I, you and I, have a pretty big fandom for really old comedies, slapstick humor, things like that. Mm-hmm. Mainly comedy trios, comedy duos. And I wanted to start there today. So I think the obvious jumping off point right now is to just talk about something that is fading into obscurity over time. In particular, the Three Stooges. Yeah. The Three Stooges are a comedy trio. They've had a couple member changes. They're all passed away at this point, obviously. But it's two brothers and Larry.
Yeah, Two brothers and Larry.
The most iconic setup. It started actually with Shemp, Mo, and Larry, but the most iconic trio was Larry, Curly, Mo. Mm-hmm. And it was very slapsticky.
And the Stooges definitely outdate us. Like you're more of a historian on that. What years were they like at their like in the 20s and 30s?
So like 30s, 40s, 50s. Stooges even had, because of reruns on television, Stooges even had resurgences throughout the 60s and 70s and even the 80s.
Really?
Stooges were very popular in the 80s as well. We're getting to that point where they are, unfortunately, some of those really old shorts, because that's what they did.
Yeah.
They did shorts. Back in the day when you would go to a movie theater, you'd be able to see a plethora of things. You wouldn't just go see a movie. You would see shorts. You would see cartoons. You would see news. You would see all sorts of stuff. Uh-huh. So they had signed on to do lots of shorts, and they are brilliant.
Yeah, they're the best.
They're brilliant. So what is your... just a jumping off point again, The Three Stooges. What is your personal history with the Three Stooges? How did you get into the Three Stooges? And how have your opinions changed as an adult now watching those Three Stooges shorts?
So as I mentioned before, the Stooges outdate me and Dylan by quite a bit. It's not something that we could have ever discovered on our own. It's not something that's been around in our lifetime or even a lifetime like before we even came around. So the Stooges for me is something that I was introduced to by my dad and he by his dad. And I remember, I want to say it was one of those situations where we were at like a Walmart or a Target and he came across a compilation DVD of the Stooges, right? And he grabbed it and he's like, you guys have to see this. The same thing happened with Ernest, which we can talk about in a second, but my dad would find these compilation DVDs that had, 4 or 5 of the Stooges shorts on them, bring it home, pop it in, be like, watch this, kids. And we're like, this is in black and white. We don't want anything to do with this. This is obviously too old to be worth our while. And all of a sudden, Disorder in the Court comes on. And we're hooked, right? And then after that comes on the one where Shemp needs to get married. Do you remember the name of that one?
Yeah, the Brideless Groom.
The Brideless Groom. And then one after the other, the one where they're in Alibaba's kingdom, right? There's one after the other. Me and my brother, I remember just going, what in the world is this? How awesome is this? And why is this the first we're ever seeing of it? And it appeals to the most rudimentary of funny bones. And it's smacking dudes and funny noises and funny voices. It's like the very core, besides like maybe a fart or a burp, the very core of what we think is funny as humans. And yeah, I mean, over the years, we would find more DVDs, more compilation DVDs. So we just got to experience more and more and more as time went on. You experience the different iterations of the Stooges, right? With Shemp or with Curly, or eventually with Curly Joe. They had a cartoon at one point that we would watch. You'd find all this stuff on DVDs and you just soak it in. You're like, this is the best there is. And you mentioned, how has my like opinion differ to them over the years? It's still something I can sit down and watch.
It's something that you and I sit down and watch.
Yeah, we've done it several, because like I said, it speaks to the most rudimentary core of what is funny, which is smacking people and funny noises, I think. And it's like one of those timeless things.
It's comedy purity, because we during the Seinfeld episode, something that I mentioned about Seinfeld was that it really pushes the comedy button, and it doesn't deviate too far from that into other emotions. And those early troops, like whether it be, the Three Stooges or Abbott and Costello, or later even duos later on, like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, like there wasn't a lot of emotional side. Some of the films with like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, sure, but I love the Three Stooges because they just push that comedy button, like Laurel and Hardy, for example. It's the same exact thing. It's just pushing that comedy bone. And like you said, it's like almost primal.
Yeah.
It's like a very simplistic primal thing.
Yeah.
And something I also really love about the Three Stooges, and I saw a documentary about this. This isn't an original thought, but I do want to say it, is I believe that they are timeless just because they're not really talking about the time period in which they were made.
Yeah.
Right? We still have courtrooms. We still have plumbers. We still have weddings. Like, all of these things still exist. There are like pieces of the scenes, like a letterpress,
or a phone booth,
or a phone booth, things that you just don't really see nowadays. But then the skits themselves don't comment too much on the time period.
Yeah.
They are just like a story, and they're very well written stories too.
Oh yeah.
Like it's more than just, I mean, obviously slapstick is the whole bread and butter of the Three Stooges. However, there's always these like plots happening, like, where Larry can knock a dude out when he hears Pop Goes the Weasel. So Mo gets this ruse where he's like, I'm going to make you a professional fighter. And then, the violin breaks. So Larry has to go out and find like a radio or something to play Pop Goes the Weasel for Larry, or sorry, for Curly rather. My apologies, misspoke. But this right here was, it was not the start of comedy, but those shorts in theaters were definitely like to a point where comedians were getting huge fame.
Yeah. It was also not the start of comedy. Like, it's not the first comedy I remember watching, but it is the earliest comedy I've ever seen, for sure.
Sure. Did your dad also show you any of the Universal stuff, like the Abbott and Costello movies?
I remember seeing a couple of the Abbott and Costello. Obviously, Who's on First is like the biggest one. That's more of like a short. I remember there being, at about the same time that he bought like a compilation video of the Stooges, he also bought a compilation DVD of Abbott and Costello. That one was a little bit like maybe beyond my humor sensibility at the time.
Well, because it wasn't really slapstick.
Wasn't slapstick, yeah.
It was Costello, and then it was the straight man, which was Bud Abbott.
Yeah.
Right? Lou Costello was the buffoon, and Bud Abbott was the straight man.
Yeah, so those were funny, but I think as a kid, I only had room in my brain for like one black and white thing, and if I had to choose, it was going to be the Stooges. So I never got into Abbott and Costello the same way that you did, but I do remember them being, almost like if my dad was building a comedy crash course, they were in it, right?
And there definitely was, I mean, we're going to fast forward a little bit, right? I mean, there have been iconic comedy teams throughout the years. I mentioned Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, very famous with The Odd Couple.
Yeah.
A lot of these are based on plays, Like there's like the fortune cookie, or they eventually go on to be plays. Very successful comedy duo. They went on to they had a resurgence with like Grumpy Old Men and things like that. And then Jack Lemmon did some roles. He was in like Glengarry Glen Ross and like all these things. But
see, I know Walter Matthau the most
from Dennis the Menace.
Of course.
Yeah,
of course.
Mr. Wilson.
That's the one that I remember being shown as a kid.
That movie's pretty good.
And also Christopher Lloyd. Yeah, that's one of those ones that's aged. We talked about has it aged well or hasn't it in the last episode. That one's one that you can watch today and be like, this is still where it's at.
And again, it's a very slapstick movie.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And of course, another a troupe that I want to talk about from early comedy as well. I want to talk a little bit about the Little Rascals as well.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, it getting into the 90s again, there was the Little Rascals reboot movie or I don't even know what to call that. Like based on the series.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was pretty good.
Oh, the best.
But the show, or the original shorts of the Little Rascals, what was really interesting about those is that you had these comedic performance actors this was before talkies or the sound era of film and things like that. So a lot of these kids were literally just performance acting. They weren't delivering lines of dialogue. It was all about their movements and their facial expressions and things like that. But the turn into the talkies, those same kids had to figure out how to deliver lines in a funny way, and they were all learning together.
Yeah.
And it was such a forward-thinking thing. You had kids of different races and ages and weights and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was like, our gang was awesome.
Uh-huh.
And sorry.
And like Alfalfa and Spanky and Froggy weren't even like the main core.
They weren't even in the original.
They were like one of the latest iterations of our game,
absolutely,
which is crazy.
So
that's the movie. I mean, I saw the movie first, and same thing. One of those DVD compilations. My dad was like, "You guys like the movie? Check out the old school stuff too." But and I was like, "Where's Spanky? Where's Alfalfa?"
It's like that.
They're not. Find out, they were much later on.
They were later on, way later. So getting out of, I call that, I'm not saying because of how much better it is than comedy. It's definitely not as sophisticated as comedies would eventually go on to become. I call that the platinum age of comedy.
Okay.
Just because of the time period. I think comedy got a lot better later. But so leaving the platinum era of comedy.
Well, before we do that,
Sure.
let's just talk about this because we've talked about this a little bit, right?
Okay.
We watch the Stooges and we go, dang, the Stooges are about to be lost to time, right? We're getting to the point where it's like over 100 years ago, right? Or
we're coming
nearly
up
100 years
nearly
ago.
100 on some of the earliest shorts.
Like
Absolutely.
nearly, and we're like, wow, like it's this like silly sense of responsibility. We're like, we got to pass this stuff on to our kids at some point, and every neighborhood kid who isn't getting it from that, like the Stooges cannot die. It's the saddest thing in the world to think that some of those early comedy troupes might be lost to time at some point. They never truly will be. There'll be like people that remember them, but as a widespread phenomenon that people that like the majority of society know about, it's almost gone. And that's like the saddest thing in the world.
It's super sad. Like I said, reruns definitely push them back up into the sky. And, there was the movie, of course, the Three Stooges movie, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Or Three Stooges the movie. I don't know if that's what it is, but what's crazy,
a movie that I went to go see in the theater with my family.
Yeah.
Because we were big fans.
And you have a very you have a fondness for it because, it's a special time for you and things like that.
Oh yeah.
The thing is with the Three Stooges, there's really no way nowadays other than word of mouth to keep their memory alive. Because again, when they in the 80s, when they kind of went back up, it was mainly because of television reruns, right? That's not something that's going to help nowadays.
Well, I wonder if at some point, television reruns,
or maybe
won't help.
Getting them all on a streaming service.
That's what I'm saying. Like, especially if we're getting up to that point where they can be public domain, right? Can Netflix just put them on there, right? Or Hulu or whoever, and just put them in their own category. So at least they're accessible. At least they're in the same spot where if I'm trying to watch an episode of Seinfeld it goes, you might also like the Three Stooges. Because that's what it's going to be, right? It's going to be the algorithm. Like, it has to be, until the Stooges or Abbott and Costello are part of the algorithm, we're really in danger of losing.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough. Like, I have all of the Stooges. Like, not just like those little compilations. I own I think I own like every Stooge short ever. And I even own almost all of them remastered in color too, which is a little weird and I don't like that much. Seeing Mo Howard in color is a little strange.
It's also nice. I don't know. There's something about like the grain on the sound and stuff too that like really makes it feel more authentic.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. So I agree. It's super sad that like the Stooges may fall to time. And they're obviously, I think, I want to say Larry, I'm so sorry, I don't know this for certain, but I think Larry might be from like Pittsburgh. And I think they have a humongous Larry mural on like a building there.
Okay.
Here, chat for a sec. I want to look this up.
Yeah. There should be like an entire early, like if you're going to call it the Platinum Era, there should be like a museum dedicated to that. If there isn't, I'm sure that there is. That includes, the Stooges and Abbott and Costello, all those early comedy troupes. If there is one of those,
he's from Philly.
He's from Philly. Okay.
So I was close.
Okay, but there's like a mural or a statue.
There's a huge mural, and I think it's him playing his violin.
Oh, his Stradivarius. His Stradivarius. My beautiful Stradivarius.
My Stradivarius. But yeah, that's a really sad thing. So, I don't know.
Which is kind of a theme for this episode. The more we're going to talk about it, the idea that comedy is slipping by the wayside.
Very much in terms of Hollywood.
Yep.
We get some of those Netflix original comedies, and obviously Adam Sandler has a 180 movie contract with Netflix or something, and he's just pushing them out like poop, you know, and like he's just crapping out movies every day. And but the reality is that in terms of cinema, in terms of going to a movie theater, comedies are very few and far between. You get comedy injected into other genres. We definitely see that with the Marvel movies.
Yeah.
But a dedicated comedy is not something you see very often nowadays. And it's kind of strange because
even in movies that are like billed as comedies, it's almost like comedy is the second thing.
It's always secondary, right?
Yeah, it's like it's an adventure movie that's also a comedy. It's never the first thing. It's always the secondary thing.
In my opinion, okay, I think comedies died out with two particular so we had the Judd Apatow movies that were flying high for a while.
Can I redirect us real quick?
Yeah.
Before we get to that point, I want to go in a little bit more sequential order.
Yeah.
In the last one we talked about the 90s, right? In the last episode, we talked about the 90s. We talked about especially the kids movies that we grew up on. What's the comedy, like the PG-13 or up comedy that you grew up on? What was the one you were watching in your household?
One.
Or give me a couple.
Because for me, it's simple. The greatest comedy ever made is Dumb and Dumber. It's Dumb and Dumber.
Yep.
Like there's no, like I'm sorry. Like out there, people disagree. That's fine. Some people are gonna say, I don't know, Austin Powers or some. Nah, man. Dumb and Dumber is as good as it gets.
Okay, can we talk about Dumb and Dumber for just a second? Because that's mine as well.
Okay, we can.
Okay.
But I'm gonna follow your rule.
Okay.
Let's get there.
Okay.
It, right?
I might be jumping the gun.
So past the Stooges, past, the Platinum Era, as I said, what are some of the earliest comedies you watched?
I'm having a hard time, and maybe that's why I'm jumping, because I really remember Dumb and Dumber as being one of the first.
Nothing from the 80s?
I'm trying to remember, because I was born in 94. If I'm not mistaken, Dumb and Dumber came out
94.
In 94, right? So anything that I would have been shown before Dumb and Dumber, I don't really remember. It was before I was making memories, right? And so...
Okay, let me redirect this then.
Okay.
What is the earliest, other than the Stooges, not necessarily the ones you were shown first, but in terms of time period?
Oh, okay. So, let me think. Do you know what yours are?
Was your dad showing you like the Brat Pack movies or anything like that?
No, I don't. No, not those ones. I really remember Dumb and Dumber as being like the first non-kid comedy
Okay.
that I've seen.
Sure.
That's the one I can remember. I'm sure I got shown others, but that one has such it's like a cornerstone in my life. I like can't remember.
Because my number 2 is an 80s movie.
Okay, what is it?
Dude, it's Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
100%.
Okay.
I would have to say it's a tie between Ghostbusters and The Burbs, which are both 80s films.
Yeah.
And obviously,
see, I know I didn't see those until later.
well, Ghostbusters and The Burbs are both like, I know this is weird to say, but they're both very much on the cusp of being horror movies.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters has parts that are very horror driven.
Yep.
It's a horror film.
Well, the concept is ghosts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same with The Burbs, for sure. The concept is a horror concept.
Yeah, it's a family living next door to psycho killers, or they're presumed psycho killers.
Yeah.
But the 80s also had really, really great, it had great comedies, right? I mean, dude, think about the 80s. Think about Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
You know, even going into 90s SNL, I'm very much in the camp that I don't think SNL's been funny for a long time.
I think most people think the last good time was when they were like in their teens or before. I think most people will agree with you.
Cause like for me personally, I think like mid to late 90s, and you know, we could even go early 2000s SNL. That's great. But there were even shows like SCTV and In Living Color and like all these things that were really great. The 70s and 80s had a lot of great comedy.
Yeah.
But for me, like I said, I think Ghostbusters is, I mean, dude, they're still milking it to this day.
Yeah.
Like it's iconic, it's great, it's funny, it's well written, it's well casted. Like Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, like we talked earlier about Rick Moranis.
Yeah.
You know, Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
Like just great.
Yeah.
It's awesome stuff. And then of course there's always like the comedy that falls into other, like Back to the Future is technically a comedy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I won't put that in my comedy list. It's in like my top movies list.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I mean, 80s definitely had a lot of comedies, right? Like there was like movies like Beverly Hills Cop, and like, I mean, Lethal Weapon is technically a comedy. There were like the Leslie Nielsen parodies.
Yeah.
Like Naked Gun and
Naked,
Airplane. Yeah. Airplane's, I think, late 70s, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Or let me double check. But
yeah.
So that's fine. We can jump to 90s because
Okay.
I think 90s is influential for the both of us.
Yeah.
I mentioned, and I know Dumb and Dumber is also your favorite comedy. Why is Dumb and Dumber your favorite comedy?
I think Dumb and Dumber is my favorite comedy. I think the punchlines per minute is like the highest of any.
Airplane was 1980.
1980. I think the punchlines per minute is like the highest. The ratio is off the charts for Dumb and Dumber. There's like no other movie I can think of that is delivering laughs as quickly and as consistently as Dumb and Dumber. And which is saying something because there's also a very coherent plot in Dumb and Dumber. It's not like they're sacrificing other storytelling aspects for the sake of humor. It's somehow being delivered simultaneously. And if not the greatest comedy actor, at least top 3 or 5, Jim Carrey at his peak delivering.
Well, 94 Jim Carrey, dude.
Yeah, The Mask,
Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah, and see, those are like the first movies I remember watching that weren't kid movies, right? Those 3 specifically, right? And we talked about comedy duos, right? You know, there's like a phenomenon of like the buddy cop or the buddy comedy. It's like the ultimate, and with Jeff Daniels being in there,
like who knew?
It's the ultimate duo. It's the ultimate set of chemistry, and it's a road trip comedy. It's like there was also an era of like the early 2000s where it was quotable comedy. That's what people wanted, right? It was being able to tell quotes to your buddies, you know, after you saw the movie. Dumb and Dumber is like the original, and still I think like this, like the gold edition of like quotable comedies.
It's it's very much like, it's like Ghostbusters in the sense that like I call Dumb and Dumber lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Because they've tried again and it does not work.
Yeah.
So Dumb and Dumber is a very unique like example of that. And It's brilliant, dude. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think on paper, Dumb and Dumber is very run of the mill. If you're like, oh, it's about two friends that are incredibly stupid, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
But it's very sophisticated.
It is.
It's super sophisticated. And when I say sophisticated, I mean something's not just low-hanging fruit. Something's not just face value, right?
Because that's when they did Dumb and Dumberer. I hadn't seen that one all the way through. I've seen a couple of scenes.
Ugh.
And it did the exact opposite. It was like, let's make these guys unbelievably stupid, right? Let's make them just rattle off the stupidest things imaginable. But with the original Dumb and Dumber, it's these guys are morons, but they're believable morons. They're morons that can still function in society, that can still drive a car and make it across the country and interact with people, albeit weirdly. These guys can still exist, right? The Dumb and Dumberer, Harry and Lloyd,
they
can't exist.
Out of the realm of possibility.
It's not possible.
And I think another reason that I love Dumb and Dumber so much, when I say something sophisticated, what I'm mainly talking about to my own sensibilities, I think dry humor. I think Dumb and Dumber has a perfect amount of dry humor. We did an episode about Seinfeld, and there was that part where I was talking about the Junior Mint episode, and it's a Junior Mint, right? Think about that scene in Dumb and Dumber where where Lloyd Christmas is walking out of the 7-Eleven and he goes, big gulps. All right. Well, see you later. That's like kind of dry.
Yeah.
Or the scene where, gas man, how the hell they know I got gas? Or the scene where he's on the phone and the guy comes up. You have other people on the phone. Get off the phone. And he gets hit and knocked out.
And it's sophisticated also in that it's one that I watched when I was 5, 6, 7, 8.
And it was still hilarious.
And then I watch as an adult and I'm like, I'm picking new stuff out, right? Which happens, naturally as you age. But, we've talked about deep cuts. I love deep cuts. I love the lines, because when everyone thinks of Dumb and Dumber, there's a few lines that come to their head, right? It's, just when I think you couldn't get any dumber.
Or you're telling me there's a chance.
Yeah, it's those 2 or 3 lines that everyone thinks of right away. But like I said, Dumb and Dumber has more laughs per minute than any other movie. So there are lines that take up a fraction of a second or a second, and they're still funny, and you can realize that they're happening in later viewings when you didn't realize them before. It's nuts.
I always crack up when it is like a pretty popular line, but it's when
that's the other thing too. Even the popular lines,
they're the best,
because there's a ton of movies. I talked about this quotable era. There are other movies where you get sick of hearing if I have to hear my wife one more time, it's not funny anymore.
I'm that way with Step Brothers. I'm so sick of hearing Step Brother quotes. We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there.
So there are movies where I'm like, okay, have you watched the movie or are you just trying to fit in? Right? But with Dumb and Dumber, if someone says, so you're telling me there's a chance, I'm like, hey, that's Dumb and Dumber. I'm not, even though that's the most quoted line, I'm not sick of it. And there's no other movie that can do that.
Yeah, or when Harry and Lloyd are walking in and he's like, I fell off the jetway again.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah.
That's such a deep cut.
I love that line.
I think the gas man line that you said a minute ago, that's the deepest of cuts, and it might be one of my favorites. One of my favorites, if we're just going to rattle off a couple, I can't believe there's no jobs in this town.
Yeah, unless you want to work 40 hours.
Unless you want to work 40 hours a week. That's one of my favorites. Because it's one of those ones that I didn't understand until I was older. I was like, oh, I get it now.
Well, and also I love the part when the two criminals are together and he's taking his pills and his partner goes, they also? And he goes, olive. I don't know why. That's just super funny. Because they also, that's something an East Coast person would say.
Yeah.
They also olive. Kind of just so funny. You don't kill people you don't know. That's a rule.
So many deep cuts that it never dries out. And the non-deep cuts, I'm not sick of. Like you said,
I can't get sick of that movie.
That's lightning in a bottle, right?
It is. It can't be done again.
Because there are plenty of other movies that we'll talk about in a second, right? That came out when we were more of like in our teens. Like I said, that quotable era where, you know, and I'm talking more specifically like the guy that comes to mind is the Will Ferrell, right? Will Ferrell, all the movies that he made are ultra quotable, but there are some that get annoying. But that's not the case with Dumb and Dumber.
No, Dumb and Dumber. If I'm being real, I've probably seen that movie like 60 times in my life. Never got sick of it, bro. Sorry, I know this is like somewhat of a family-friendly podcast. I used to smoke weed back in the day, and I used to watch Dumb and Dumber in French. And I thought it was so funny. Je m'appelle Lloyd Christmas. You know? Yeah, like I would even watch it in French, and it was so funny. I'm like, I know what they're saying, you know, kind of thing.
That's so wild.
But yeah, Dumb and Dumber for me, and it really comes from, it feels like Canadian humor, because Canadians are very dry in their humor. Like I mentioned SCTV earlier. You probably have no idea what I'm talking about.
I don't.
It was sort of an SNL type show. I think it took place in Canada.
Okay.
But like, think about this for a second.
Is that where like I know Mike Myers was on SNL. Did he maybe start there, you think? With
I don't think Mike Myers was ever on SCTV. No. Okay.
I just know
I think
Canadian.
John Candy was on there, and I think maybe Rick Moranis. There's so many people that are gonna fact check me, and they're gonna be like, "You're wrong all the time, Dylan." Yeah. But I'm speaking off the cuff here. But think about this for a sec. I'm talking about the Canadian style of humor.
Okay.
If let's say that Dumb and Dumber, let's go back in time, and they tell you that they're going to put Norm Macdonald in that movie as like a side character, would it feel super out of place?
I don't think so.
Right. It's that like Canadian thing. It's like kind of dry and Canadian.
As a matter of fact, I know that the motorcycle cop, I'm spacing his name. I should know what it is. He's definitely Canadian. I know he is. I can't remember his name, but I know he's Canadian.
And Jim Carrey's Canadian, bro.
True that.
He's Canadian.
Yeah, that's true.
Isn't he?
But I think so.
Yeah.
But I also think, you know, not only if you just introduce Norm Macdonald, you could also swap out a lot of the side characters for Norm Macdonald and it would work. Like Norm Macdonald could have been the motorcycle cop.
That would have been so funny.
What a gem that man was.
Hey, pull over. But yeah, the reality is that I've always like thought about that. I think a lot of it plays to like Canadian dry humor. And
well, I mean, it's based in Rhode Island. That's
right
where they're
there.
from, right?
It's right there.
So if you're not like super far east, like New York or Maine, where you have that like more humor, I wonder if those areas that are near Canada have a little bit of bleed over on that kind of humor. Yeah,
like Canadian humor, even stuff that I'm not like. I'm a fan. I'm not jumping ahead. I'll go back, but like, you know, Trailer Park Boys, I'm a fan of. Like, I'm not a fan of what's that other Canadian show that's really
like Letterkenny or something?
I don't like that show.
I haven't watched
personally, but it's super popular. People love Canadian humor.
Yeah.
But even going back, I think Dumb and Dumber really nailed that like perfect dry, but kind of over the top, loud.
Because it still had Jim Carrey in it, right? So he was still going to do outlandish stuff, right? And too good. He does it well, obviously.
And Jeff Daniels, dude. Like, I said this to you before. This might be a little bit of a hot take. I think Jeff Daniels is funnier than Jim Carrey in that movie.
That's tough for me to agree with. Although Harry Dunn, I mean, it's 50-50. They're both incredible.
Yeah,
and Jeff Daniels is not a comedy actor.
No, he's a theatrical, like he's a stage actor.
Yeah,
you know,
like
dramatic actor.
He plays George Washington in like historical movies and stuff.
Yeah, he's very much like Jason Alexander. You know.
Yeah.
So, 1994, we saw Dumb and Dumber. We saw that this was the rise of Jim Carrey for sure.
For sure.
Ace Ventura, which is a very, very funny movie.
Yeah.
I like the sequel more, and I think we both agree there.
Yeah.
But the original is so funny.
Yeah.
And then The Mask, which is like, I don't even know what to say about that movie because it's over the top original.
Yep.
It's really funny. They build this really unique world in it. It's almost like a comic book.
It like takes place in Edge City or something. It's not even a real city, I don't think.
It's so crazy. It like the visuals are cool. It's like it's very old school mafia crime drama kind of feel. But it's not set in the 30s, but it has like a very 30s.
You want to hear something funny? I mentioned mafia the other day to one of my younger siblings, and they were like, "What's mafia?" And because they didn't really understand what that term was, and I started describing it, and they still didn't understand. And I said, "You know, in The Mask, all of those criminals that hang out at the Coca Cabana or whatever it's called,
Coco Bongo,
the ones that hang out at the Coco Bongo." And they're like, "Oh yeah, with the slick back hair and the suits, the nice suits, pinstripe suits." And I was like, "That's a mafia." And they were like, "Oh, so it's the perfect example of what a mafia." You're right. It's got this like fusion of over the top cartoon comedy, comic book setting, and then a mafia movie right in the middle of it.
Like if I could ever interview Jim Carrey, it would 100% be about The Mask. Just because like that movie is astonishing. Just how does a movie like that even come to be? It's brilliant, dude. It's so good. But getting into the 90s, we obviously saw a lot of these SNL. SNL really took over. SNL really took over the comedy space in the world of movies, right? Like we obviously had like actors like you mentioned Will Ferrell. We have John Candy was on SCTV, I think, and he unfortunately had a short-lived career. Chris Farley, David Spade.
Yeah, we can't talk about 90s comedies and not mention like Tommy Boy. Like that's another one. It's like Dumb and Dumber and Tommy Boy. Those are like the ones that I remember seeing very first in like my comedy exposure. Yeah, Tommy Boy is another classic.
And that was like before David Spade got weird. Like he's a little weird now.
He is.
But in that movie, he's super funny. Like that era of David Spade is so funny.
Yeah.
Like I love that David Spade, especially in Tommy Boy. And he was also in Black Sheep, I think, too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Him and Chris Farley did Black Sheep together. They're just really funny.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Chris Farley is one of those cases that he didn't really get to have too long of a career either.
Yeah. Even so, one of the comedy icons, like the powerhouses of comedy.
And then, of course, from those sketch shows, we saw the rise of Adam Sandler.
Yep. Chris Rock, who had like a very extensive stand-up comedy career and then got into sketch.
He's still considered one of like
the
best stand-up comedians ever.
Yep, definitely.
Him and like Dave Chappelle, I would say, are both like two of the. And Richard Pryor is pretty respected.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy, I think, is still up there. Yeah.
So is there anything in the 90s you feel also that elevated comedy? Because 94, again, Dumb and Dumber was huge. However, did we see any other movies in the 90s that really pushed it up? I mean, I mentioned it earlier in like a joking manner, but Austin Powers was like a craze when it came out.
Yeah, that was huge.
Admittedly, I was a fan of it when I was a kid. I think it's ridiculously stupid now. Like I don't like Austin Powers at all.
That's definitely one of those movies that was geared to teenagers, and I think once at a certain point you kind of outgrow that humor.
Well, and again, it's like that. Hey, we have these SNL actors, and they have these characters in these skits. Let's make them full-fledged features, right? Like we saw that with Wayne's World, and then we saw like Corky Romano. I don't know if you remember Corky Romano.
I don't.
That was another SNL movie, and then we saw Molly Shannon in Superstar. Like there was just all these.
Adam Sandler was I mean, it's hard to talk about 90s comedies without Billy Madison. And
for me, it's Happy Gilmore.
Happy Gilmore is the one from there, too.
Like top tier,
because Adam Sandler also had like a stint in like the 2000s with Big Daddy and 50 First Dates. He almost had like two eras of his own kind of comedies.
Yeah, he carried over. I think Big Daddy was 90s actually.
Was it? Okay.
Was Big Daddy 99? But
I don't know.
But he just continued to elevate throughout the 2000s. Yeah.
But they're very
50 First
different.
Dates, Mr. Deeds, and then up to like Anger Management and things like that. Yeah.
And now recently with some, not so heavy hitters in the Netflix era.
So yeah, Big Daddy was 99. So,
Okay.
but remember what I said in the last episode? It's almost like the end of one decade it's like almost a part of the next decade, right?
Yeah.
99 is practically 2000s to me.
Yeah.
But so Adam Sandler, you have Happy Gilmore, you have Billy Madison, Big Daddy. I freaking love that movie, dude.
Yep.
Like, and then I know that like goes into the whole like it has heart, but I'm cool with that. I don't care.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's the funny thing about, like, we said the Stooges, and I think Dumb and Dumber is the same. It just presses that funny button, and it's not trying to do a whole lot more except for press that funny button. But comedy doesn't have to be that way, right?
It's nice to be dynamic.
Totally.
And there are movies that do it very well.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's nice having a spectrum and like a journey throughout the course of a film. And it's also important to mention that comedies were like box office hits, like big money makers. And then of course home video took off even further. So, I mean, I don't want to breeze just too far ahead, but in the 2000s, we obviously saw, Will Ferrell rose. We mentioned Superstar a second ago. He was a side character in that. He did Night at the Roxbury, but then he eventually like made his way into being like a lead.
Yep.
Right. So I would honestly say, if I'm not mistaken, I think Will Ferrell movies had been consistently profitable in that era. Right.
Definitely.
Because later on, especially when he paired up with like John C. Reilly, Talladega Nights, and then of course Anchorman was a hit sensation.
Anchorman was huge.
Yeah. And then ultimately, like, it's funny because the end of comedy, as far as like the theatrical comedy, I always see it again at the end with Will Ferrell and Judd Apatow. Those are like the two where I see the finish line.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like the last comedy that I went and saw in theaters that was like really good and over the top was Step Brothers.
Really?
Yeah.
That you went and saw in theaters?
Yes. Like a comedy that I saw and I was like, I want to go see that in theaters. And it was because my brother was raving about it. And then again, all the Judd Apatow, like Steve Carell movies, like you had like the 40-Year-Old Virgin. There was Knocked Up with Seth Rogen. Like he kind of ruled that space for a while.
Yeah. Because there was, I just want to mention a couple within that Will Ferrell time frame, right? I want to mention a couple that I really liked as, because that was like my teens, right? So we had like Talladega Nights is probably my favorite Will Ferrell movie. And then we also had Benchwarmers. I want to mention Benchwarmers, one of those Happy Madison movies produced by Adam Sandler. Also one of those movies that I could just quote for days with my buddies.
It's the thing that's funny about the Benchwarmers is on its face, it's not very funny, but those deep cuts are like stupid funny.
Yeah.
It's like a kid-friendly movie, pretty much. It's PG-13.
Yeah.
But it also, like, it surrounds kids. It's that typical, like, hey, let's play sports with kids. Mm-hmm. But the deep cuts of that movie are stupid hilarious.
Yeah.
That movie has so many lines that are, like, comedy gold, dude.
Yep. Yeah, and you had this, like, span of... It almost went from like Happy Madison to like Lorne Michaels producing, right? So the Saturday Night Live guy putting his people into movies. And then, like you said, we moved into, and there's plenty of stuff in between. So if you're listening and we're missing something, please don't be upset at us. We're generalizing. But you had the Judd Apatow, right? And that's where we saw the rise of Seth Rogen, of Jonah Hill, James Franco, even a little bit. He started as like a dramatic actor and then moved into some of the other ones with...
Yeah, because him and Seth Rogen were in Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah.
In the 90s.
Yeah.
Or early 2000s.
Which was a comedy, but I don't think we saw James Franco really become like a comedy movie actor until maybe Pineapple Express, right? But then we saw him in everything else that Judd Apatow was producing, right? This Is the End, The Dictator, those kinds of movies, right? Let me ask you a question, because I have there's a very important middle ground for me in between the quotable comedies of my teens and then what I'll call like adult raunchy comedies. What do you remember being like the first like raunchy comedy that you saw that just made you laugh, right? Maybe not your first R-rated comedy, but like, you know what I mean? Like kind of graduating from the Dumb and Dumbers to something a little bit heavier.
Well, I was allowed to watch all those movies in my childhood, right?
Yeah.
Like my mom and dad got me into horror films at like a very young age, and I wasn't really cut off. I remember my brother showing me, Dirty Work, which no one listening to this knows what the hell that movie is, but it's a Norm Macdonald and Artie Lang movie. It's one of my favorite movies, and I think
it's Chris Farley's last movie before he passed.
It is. And it's funny because I actually saw like a reel on Instagram or whatever the other day, and it was that scene of when Mitch is like asking him if he could stay at his place, and he goes, well, here's the thing, you know, and he like talks about his roommate, and I was like, wait, there's a Dirty Work clip that's like a viral. It's one of those stupid, like, when you're asking your friends for help, but they're not there for you or something stupid.
Yeah.
POV. I was like, oh my God, Dirty Work. But my brother showed that movie to me. And that's also a very like Canadian comedy kind of style comedy where it's dry. It's like I showed it to you, I think, right?
Yeah, I saw it the first time with you.
My brother showed that to me, and it has a lot more swearing in it.
Yeah.
And it's a little more raunchy, but not like American Pie.
Yeah.
Right? Which, like, again, getting into like 90s and early 2000s, like American Pie was I guess maybe that one? I don't know. I have no idea. It's hard to say. So do you have a distinct one?
I know for sure which ones they are.
Are we talking R-rated?
Yep.
What were they?
So, for context, my family didn't grow up watching R-rated movies, except for a couple that my dad deemed, you know, appropriate enough that we could see when we were younger. I remember when he showed us Rambo, right? First Blood. And he went, well,
he showed you Children of the Corn.
He showed us Children of the Corn and Gladiator. And his justification was
is
always
Gladiator. Oh, it is R.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So his justification was, well, this movie was made back when there was no PG-13. If it was made today, it would be PG-13. That's what he would tell us, right? But I didn't really watch any R-rated comedies until I was like 18 and left the house to go to college for the first time, right? That's when I got my first laptop that was mine to do schoolwork. And of course, I, discovered along with a lot of my other, neighbors and roommates, those websites, those like really janky, shady websites where you could watch movies
like
for
1,
free.
2, 3 movies or something.
Stuff like that. Yeah. Because Netflix had like just come out and it didn't have a ton of stuff, right? But yeah, like 1, 2, 3 movies. And I remember I think there were 3, but I can remember 2 movies that I watched. No, yeah, there were 3. There were 3 movies that I wanted to watch that were R-rated comedies because I'd heard good things about them and I had never seen them. Step Brothers was one of them. 21 Jump Street, which was pretty recent at the time, and Tropic Thunder, which is a movie that me and you talk about a ton.
Tropic Thunder we do talk a lot about.
But that was those were my first R-rated comedies that I watched on my own, and I like experienced my first raunchy comedy, right?
Seeing Step Brothers for the first time, there was like really nothing like it.
No.
It was like I think I saw it like 4 times in theaters or something. I took different friends to go see it. And
the groundwork was there because I had seen Talladega Nights, loved Talladega Nights. So it's like, okay, more of these two. It can't go wrong. And of course, laugh my butt off just at Step Brothers.
And then they eventually did go wrong.
Yeah.
With what was the
Sherlock Holmes movie?
Sherlock Holmes one? Yeah. What is it called?
Holmes and Watson.
Ugh.
Which I did watch. I did watch that one.
Yeah. You're a lot more forgiving.
I'm pretty forgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. So
but yeah, that introduced me to a couple of things. If I can like harp on it for a second.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
It introduced me to, the silly, like raunchy, but for the sake of silly comedy in Step Brothers. It introduced me to the highest level of satire with Tropic Thunder. Like if we're talking about satire, it doesn't get any more important than Tropic Thunder. And then 21 Jump Street, right? Like a good remake, like a remake that worked, Like I had seen other, like PG-13. I remember seeing Starsky and Hutch when I was in high school. Love that one. But like 21 Jump Street, one of those remakes that everyone thought was a sequel-itis thing or a remake-itis thing, and then they made 2 of them, and then they were done. They like made fun of the remake-itis and then dipped out.
They were gonna do a third one. They were. It
really?
was they were gonna bring Men in Black into it and call it MIB 23. And it never happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, like 21 Jump Street with aliens
Would have been wild.
that'd have been so sick.
Yeah.
And obviously we skipped out on talking about Men in Black on the 90s episode.
Great one.
Yeah.
Great one.
Yeah. So all right, so you were introduced to like the raunchier R-rated comedies. And you know what? I want to give credit where credit's due. Obviously, there are exceptions to what I'm gonna say. I personally feel, and this is a topic that's gonna span over many episodes. I feel like the current state of movies in general is really volatile. I kind of hate what the movie theaters have become because it's a very special, sacred place to me.
Do you remember the last comedy you saw in theater for sure?
Well, I mean, we saw Jackass Forever together,
Yeah.
right?
Prior to that, what do you think it was? I think I know what mine was.
I don't know, man.
Like the last true comedy.
I saw like Dumb and Dumber 2,
Okay.
which was awful. But I don't know. I mean, like,
Which was what year do you think?
Dumb and Dumber 2 was like I'll have
Definitely like 2018, maybe?
to
2015?
Dumb and Dumber 2. 2014.
So from 2014 until Jackass Forever, 2022, 6 years.
I don't know if I went and saw. I mean, I got dragged to different movies. Like, I don't know, man. Someone made me go see like Pitch Perfect or something. You know, what's that character's name? Like Fat Amy or whatever.
Yeah.
There's like comedy elements, and then I think I saw Bridesmaids, which might have been around that time too.
Okay.
But like there was definitely a period. Okay, this is what I call the last fart. Okay, there was like a point where comedy started going off the edge in terms of like it was falling off, and then every freaking movie you saw in theaters was Melissa McCarthy. It was like everything. It's like Melissa McCarthy and whoever, Jason Bateman, or I don't know, whoever is going to go across the country.
Yeah, she had a stretch where she was like, for some reason, the only bankable comedy actor. Like you're right. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, it was like every freaking movie was Melissa McCarthy, and I'm like, okay, no offense to the world, I don't like Melissa McCarthy. I don't think she's funny. I think I don't know. I think I'm trying not to sound like a jerk, but I think that a lot of people just think it's funny to see fat people flailing around. Okay, and I'm a fat guy. I can say that.
I mean, that's a tried and true formula. That
It totally is
between John Candy and Chris Farley and Kevin James. Yeah,
but it's just like past that point, I was just like I think when I first saw Melissa, because she was in Bridesmaids, right?
That was like her breakout. I think.
I was like, this is really Bridesmaids is really funny, but then like I don't know, you just get tired of stuff, and I swear, like what dedicated comedies are coming out today?
So this goes back to something I said earlier. The comedy movies that are coming out are blank / comedy, not comedy / blank, right? Because I saw the first Jumanji movie, right?
Oh, Welcome to the Jungle.
Yeah,
I saw that in theaters.
I saw that in theaters, but I don't really consider that like a true comedy, right? It's adventure / comedy, right? And then I saw the other Kevin Hart and the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie in theaters, Central Intelligence, which I think is a spy / comedy movie. It's like comedy doesn't come first in any of those, right? Because I mean, well, number one, The Rock is in it, so it's going to be an action of some sort. But like, there's nothing coming out nowadays that's comedy / something. It's the other way around, right?
Yeah, it's almost like comedy is baked into the dialogue and it's not baked into the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah, like the situation is drama, espionage, spy thriller, whatever, but then comedy's just baked into lines.
Well,
of
yeah,
dialogue,
and
right?
I hate to say it, but I think that and we're going to talk about the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in more detail later, but I think it's everyone following that formula, right? Because Well, Guardians of the Galaxy comes out, right? And it's so funny. It's so funny. But it's a superhero sci-fi flick, right? And then all the other studios went, oh, so we can just make sci-fi flicks or action flicks or spy flicks or adventure flicks and then bake the comedy into the dialogue, right? It's not a comedy first, right? Because as funny as Guardians is, it's not a comedy movie.
No, it's not. It's not really. Again, to me, this is like a self definition, right? This isn't like the way it is. So people are more than welcome to.
Same with what I've been saying.
They're more than welcome to disagree with me, but I feel like true comedy is situational and dialogue.
Yeah.
I think that if you have dialogue based comedy, you that's your secondary genre. It has to be, because it's like, I don't know. That's just how I look at it.
Yeah.
To me, comedy is more than dialogue. Comedy is like bits and hooks set up. There's like punchlines, but the punchline is more than just words. It's like something that's going on in the scene.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's different characters. It's like things that don't directly interact with the characters right then and there.
Yeah.
That like maybe it's happening elsewhere, or
it's Harry and Lloyd have just fed poison to this guy and he's having a heart attack. Or not poison, sorry, the hot peppers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then it's all of the things they're saying in that scene. It's like the scene has to be funny and then the dialogue is part of the scene.
Yeah, like that scene, you have Jim Carrey saying pills are good, but you also have him like spitting out his burger and doing CPR on the guy.
Yeah. And it all starts with they're trying to save him from something that they caused. Right. The situation is comedy.
Whereas, like, I'm not trying to undersell it, but I haven't even seen Central Intelligence. But what I can assume is like there's a situation where they're driving and then The Rock makes a short joke about Kevin Hart, and then Kevin Hart probably makes a joke about how big The Rock is.
Yeah.
And it's just like, got it.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks. I chuckled. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. But the scene is driving from point A to point B to progress a spy movie, right? It's not the scene is funny and then the dialogue, It's
the dialogue. The dialogue is funny and the scene is normal. Yeah. But like every scene in Dumb and Dumber,
every single.
It's built for comedy.
Yeah.
You have scenes built for comedy, and then you have the dialogue to back it up.
Yeah. And we are judging it against Dumb and Dumber, the gold standard, so that may not be super fair, but it's our point of reference.
Well,
right?
and what I'm getting at mainly is that I'm making a bold statement. I'm not saying comedy is dead. I just think you're not going to... First of all, theaters are on their way out as it is, but like... There's more to talk about when we get to the MCU episode, and there's more to talk about when we get into like the state of horror and like all these different episodes. But I hate this freaking $1 billion movie thing that's happening in Hollywood, because it makes it to where those B and C tier movies cannot get made. Yeah. We're not seeing any mid-budget movies come to theaters. We're seeing over the top $130 to $210 million movies.
Yeah.
And it's like, sure, the other ones go to Netflix, but it's like, you're not seeing great comedies in theaters anymore. That's the statement that I'm making right now.
Yeah.
And that was why I wanted to do this episode with you, is because I wanted to say, we talked about we discussed a little bit like the rise of comedy. We had like SNL, we had Jim Carrey in 94, we had slapstick and duos and trios back in the Platinum Age. And again, it goes well past that. Comedy has been around since well before film or audio. However, comedy is still a thing. Stand-up comedy is stronger than it's ever been.
Yep.
But the theatrical comedy, to an extent, is dead. It's dead.
It's dead.
And that really sucks.
It's a big bummer.
It sucks.
It's a really big bummer.
Because I love going to the movies.
Yeah.
I love going to the movies.
And what makes me even sadder about it is that even though I'm saying this, I'm also conditioned to not go see a comedy when it comes out.
How come?
I mean... even though I agree with what we're saying, I have to make like a conscious decision to go see it. And then I most of the times forget to go see it. It's a bummer.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And it's, so there is something interesting happening. And I don't know if you know much about this. I'll bring it up. There is a stand-up comedian who is coming out with a comedy movie at the end of the month, right? It's Bert Kreischer. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's part of the Joe Rogan, Tom Segura, Joey Diaz crew, right? And I don't mean to throw shade. He's like my least favorite of that group, right? But he's coming out with a movie called The Machine.
He's a fat guy who takes his shirt off.
Right. Well, I listened to all of the podcasts that he has with Tom Segura.
He also seems
stuff.
like a sweet guy.
Yeah, he is the sweetest guy.
He's like the sweeter one.
There is more to him than just being a fat guy, but not a ton more, especially when you compare him to the other guys in that group. But he's coming out with a movie called The Machine at the end of the month, right? And he keeps saying something. Every time he's promoting it, he's like, people, please go see this movie. Not for me, because what it means for comedy. He says, if this movie makes a bunch of money, your favorite comedian is going to get a movie deal. That's how it works. If this movie makes money, comedies get to come back to theaters, right? And even though I know that might be true, and I really want to go see the movie, A, I'm not as interested in Bert Kreischer, and B, I'm afraid I'm going to forget to go see it. Right? Even though I want to be part of the solution to bring comedies back into theaters.
Sure.
I want to be part of that solution. I've been in the Marvelization period of movie theaters for so long now. Even though I'm trying to break that habit, I'm worried I'm conditioned and I'm going to forget to go see Bert Kreischer's movie. Even though I want to be part of the solution. Right? And hopefully me saying this on this podcast makes me go see it. You know what I mean?
Someone will hold you accountable. Carrie, make sure he goes and sees it.
Even though I am not as interested in that comedy, I'm interested in what it can mean for comedies in theaters, right? Part of seeing Jackass Forever was that. I'm like, I get to go see a comedy in a theater, right? It's a little bit different, right? Because the formatting of the comedy is different than like a typical narrative comedy.
It's like the opposite of Marvel. It's like all situational comedy.
Exactly, right?
Yeah,
so
like the dialogue can be pretty funny, but you're watching Dave England crap his pants.
Yeah. So seeing Jackass Forever in theater was like a step forward. It's that Jackass is such an anomaly. They're not going to make more just because it made money, right? But seeing The Machine with Bert Kreischer might be the first step in the right direction, right? And I'm trying to commit myself to go see it.
I'll go see it with you.
Okay.
So maybe
I'm not even convinced it's going to be my favorite. I just know that it might be a step in the right.
Is it a stand-up movie?
No. It's a narrative movie. It's got Mark Hamill in it. Like it's like a pretty well put together movie, right? As far as like the budget and everything, it's like it is like a return to stand-up comedians and sketch comedians getting a movie again.
Well, and we have all these, yeah, no, totally. And we have these corporate stabs, like corporations in terms of studios are always trying to shove certain people in our faces.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, no, I'm not going to go see the new Pete Davidson movie. I don't care to see Pete Davidson.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear the 400th joke about Pete Davidson talking about how his dad died in 9/11.
Yeah.
I'm sick of that.
Yeah.
Like, enough is enough. It's enough.
Yeah.
So it's like, I want comedies, but you're right. It's the same with me in horror, right?
Uh-huh.
The reason I've seen Evil Dead Rise like 3 times in theaters so far, and I'm going to go see it again.
It's not because Evil Dead Rise is your favorite horror movie.
I want to give them my support.
Exactly.
I want those horror movies to keep coming out because right now what we have,
Yeah.
we have Marvel and sometimes DC, like we're getting The Flash soon. And then like we have a sort of a little rise in horror flicks, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to give that my money. I want to give that my support. I'm voting with my wallet. And I promise you right now that if true, genuine comedy sees a resurgence, I would support it just the same. I would.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll go see The Machine.
Yeah.
I think Bert Kreischer is like Kreischer. Oh, okay.
He's funny enough.
He seems like a sweet dude.
He is.
And
he is totally sweet.
I mean, if it's got Mark Hamill,
Yeah.
trying to manipulate me to go see it, that's fine. Yeah.
But right, like you said, vote with your dollar, Like this podcast is probably going to come out after The Machine drops, so I can't say like go see comedies in theaters, But I really want them to come back. But I can't hope for them to come back and then not go see them.
Yeah.
You have to be part of the solution.
And we're not talking about freaking Adam Sandler's 80th Netflix movie
which I can't support with my dollar anyway. I already have a Netflix subscription.
I mean, you're giving them your money.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I want to pay $10 plus the price of a bucket of popcorn
and Junior Mints
and go see this comedy, right? There are certain directors I'll go see every one of their movies in theaters. Not because I know it's, like the new Guy Ritchie movie. I'm going to go see the new Guy Ritchie movie in theaters, not because every single movie that Guy Ritchie has ever made is a banger, but because I like him and I want him to keep making movies. And I don't want him to be fall victim to not being able to make movies again because he's not doing a superhero movie. I don't want him to fall victim to that. And I don't want comedies. I don't want comedies in theaters to die. They're fun.
I mean, theaters will die. There's no way.
Don't tell me that.
I'm sorry. There's no way. There's no way around it. But the thing is we really need to enjoy it while we have it. We know that this is going out someday. I want to enjoy it. I love going to the movies. I love getting the popcorn. I love sitting down and I want to laugh again, man. I want to see these. I want to go to the theater and see I want to see a great comedy again. You
know what I also want to experience in the theater? Not having to be there for 3.5 hours.
That's a whole that's like a whole episode on its own, just talking about how every movie is so dang long.
It's give me an hour and a half of comedy and 2 trailers. I don't need to be in the theater. I don't want to walk. It's going to see a late night movie. This sounds like such an old man thing to say.
I want to get to bed.
I'm 29 now, so I'm an old dude.
Yeah, your knees are about to start going.
My knees are getting real achy even talking about this. I can't go to a movie at 8 o'clock anymore. I can't go to a movie at 9 o'clock. Definitely can't go to a movie at 10 o'clock. I have to go to a movie at 5:30 because I know when it's over, it's going to be 10 o'clock anyway. Somehow I'm going to spend 5 hours in the theater. It's bringing comedies back to the theater would also solve that problem too, right? I can go to the theater and it doesn't eat my entire evening away.
I know, we have an episode about the Marvel movies, but I will say this. I went and saw Wakanda Forever, and I looked at the runtime and I was like, oh, 2.5 hours, really? I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then we go see Guardians 3, and I'm like, oh, 2.5 hours again? It's can we freaking stop this?
But when we saw Jackass, right? We went to the 7 o'clock showing,
and we got out at 9:30,
and then we went back to your house so we could talk about it.
Yeah,
we had. It wasn't time for bed. We had time to go digest the movie and not brush our teeth and get in bed immediately.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think comedies would solve the runtime crisis.
Yeah. To give credit where credit is due. Once I sit down in the theater, I'm not checking my watch, right? Those movies that are 2.5, 3 hours long, they're entertaining enough where I'm not dreading it while I'm in it. I just dread it beforehand and dread it after, right? So credit where credit is due. They're doing a good job of engaging me while I'm in the theater. I just don't like the experience before and after for time. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Okay. I mean, I was kind of checking my watch on the Batman, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that's one of those we talk about adventure / comedy. That one's Batman / nothing. You know what I mean? There's
Batman / nothing.
There's no comedy, there's no levity in that movie whatsoever, which is what they intended.
Yeah, it's just every 5 minutes you have something in the way. And it's but yeah, ultimately, the reason I wanted to make this episode with you is I wanted to talk about how comedy has just dried up.
Yeah.
And again, there's people that are going to say, no, there's ones on Hulu and Netflix. It's no, I'm talking about the theatrical comedy.
Yeah.
The ones that you go out and see. Do you remember? God, I remember going and seeing Old School with my brother in theaters with Will Ferrell and Luke Wilson. I remember going and seeing Anchorman with my brother.
Yeah.
I remember going.
The movie that I remember seeing in theater before Jackass was Tag, right? a movie that, say what you will, I love that movie, right?
It's pretty good.
And I remember seeing the commercial and going, that looks so funny. And I love, John Hamm, and I love Hannibal Buress, and I love Nick from New Girl. Like, I love those guys. I want to go see them. My buddy's like, let's go see. And I had the awesomest time in theater.
It's a pretty good movie. I was surprised as to how good it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like Ed Helms.
So
Ed Helms is great.
Ed Helms is great.
Yeah.
So those experiences in the theater where you're just going just to laugh, I think we mentioned this when we talked about Jackass in the other episode. The world needs that right now.
Yeah, the world needs laughter.
The world needs to be able to go outside to a place that's not your living room and laugh, right? I can have plenty of laughter in my living room on one of the 9 subscription streaming services, but I also need an opportunity to get out of my house and laugh too.
Well, and it's like I said in the last episode, the 90s episode, things being overly accessible ruins the specialness of them.
Yeah.
If I have access to something, like going to a theater, I am forced to sit down and watch it. But if I'm at my house and I put on something that someone busted their butt on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this isn't hitting home right now. And I just change to the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's like that thing doesn't get the respect it probably deserves. And it makes me appreciate things less. We are appreciating things less, people. That's why you're seeing movie theaters dry up. That's why this is happening. It's because we have this convenience, which I love.
Yeah.
Can't we have both?
Yeah.
Can't we have both? Can't you watch everything you want on Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max and all these things, but still go to the movies? Can we still go to the movies?
Yeah.
I can't make people go to the movies, but I'm telling you, it's a 2-part problem. It's the fact that we have studios that are thinking if a movie doesn't make $1 billion plus, it's not worth their time. And we also have people just not wanting to going to see movies unless it's one of those $250 million budget movies.
Dude,
it's
I went to go see Kong versus Godzilla in theaters.
That was a sick movie.
It was cool, right?
Yeah.
It was my weekend plan. I was ready for it. And I told one of my coworkers at the time, I'm going to see this. And he's like, oh yeah, man, I can't wait to watch that at home. And I said, what? He's like, HBO is releasing it at home at the same time as the theater. And I said, I didn't say this to him, but I thought to myself, you're a moron. You want to see Kong versus Godzilla on your home TV? That's the movie theaters were invented for that movie, for that kind of movie. And you're going to watch it at home. It's so goofy to me. And I know we're talking about comedy. This isn't quite a comedy. We're kind of ranting about theaters now.
Well, no, but this is very much, it's all part of this.
It's all the same thing.
It's all part of
right?
the same disease.
Take advantage of the theater. Why would, I know that
guys, it's $10.
It can be expensive, right? If you're a mother or father of 5 and you're listening to this, I know that it's not quite viable. If you're just a single or, no kids having person like me and Dylan, you can go to the theater once a month. You can, right?
And most theaters have those cool subscription plans where you get one free movie a month or something. Yeah. So it's and then popcorn and everything's discounted. It's just I don't know. If you can swing it, I'm putting a call to action, and it's not going to do anything. I know. But if you can swing it, go to the freaking movie theater and support movies. I'm not saying you have to stop supporting Marvel movies. I'm not saying you have to stop supporting, Fast 28. The one where Vin Diesel goes to another dimension and he drives his car through a bookshelf and then he's in a Christopher Nolan movie all of a sudden.
They recast Paul Walker as a different version of him in a different dimension.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Doctor Strange comes in and then gets the alternate Paul Walker.
And then 21 Jump Street and Men in Black show up.
Yeah. I'm not saying you have to stop supporting those movies, but people, how awesome would it be? I know I'm dreaming here. Let me say this. How awesome would it be to get a movie like Forrest Gump in theaters? I didn't mention it in the 90s, the Robert, Forrest Gump, those old movies that just follow a character and there doesn't have to be this like over the top like stimuli.
Yeah.
You're just watching a character story unfold. How cool would it be to have those in theaters? How cool would it be to regularly get like $30 million to $50 million budget movies or even less that aren't horror, because horror are going to make money.
Yeah.
But it's like, how great would it be to go see a comedy that was made with like $20 million? You know, it doesn't have to be these big epic stimulated like experiences all the time. Like it, you know, it's not every movie needs to equate to the same sensation as eating a freaking block of cheese. Okay. Like sometimes you can have a slice and you're perfectly good. So let's go to the movies. Hopefully comedies will come back.
I hope, man.
But I don't know if I think that's wishful thinking, because I love good comedies. It's like to the point where my whole life is relying on horror now and I don't watch anything else.
Yeah.
And it's like, can we please get good comedies again in the movie theater?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I want to ask one quick question to finish up. If you've listened to our first couple of episodes, you know that me and Dylan have made a couple of short films together, and both of those were horror/horror suspense, right? Do you think we're ever going to make a comedy together? And before I like really pass that to you, comedy is super hard, right? That's one thing we haven't said yet. Comedy is hard.
I think
right?
Good comedy is hard.
Good comedy is hard, right? And that is, we should have said that at the beginning, because that's a caveat to this whole conversation. Good comedy is hard to make, right? It takes really talented and really funny people working on the same wavelength, right? I love comedy and would love to be a part of an experience of making a comedy one day. I know you've worked on comedies before. What do you think that we'll ever give it a go?
So as far as like what I want to do currently, no.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I might end up, I don't know where my career is going to take me, but I might end up someday where I'm like, oh, I'm feeling a comedy, you know? But currently right now, I don't know, but I don't want to rule that out, because I just have other things I want to make first.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing is too, is like in a partnership/friendship that me and you have, the things that you're actively thinking about making are different than the things that I'm actively thinking about making. So who knows? Maybe at one point I'll bring something to you, or you'll bring something to me, and we'll go, whoa, wait a second. Let's just do it. You know?
Oh yeah. We will bring comedies back to the cinema.
No.
Alek is saying that it takes us.
No, there are funnier people than us working harder than us to bring comedies back. But, you know, part of me hopes that one day I can be a part of something like that. I don't know if I'm funny enough, but I still want to be included.
You know what I want to do? Hit me up if anyone thinks this is a cool idea. What we should do is we should pull our money together. It's an investment. It's not to make money.
Yeah.
We should, if we really do care about the Stooges as much as we say, let's pull our money together. Let's rent out a theater for a few hours, and let's just run Three Stooges shorts and advertise it and let people just come watch Three Stooges in the theater.
Yeah. Let's do like a Stooges festival.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
Because I don't know, man. That would be sick to watch Stooges shorts in a theater.
Totally.
But yeah, the whole point of this, guys, was, I don't know, just to not only reminisce about our favorite comedies, but to just talk about the state of comedy and how it's really bumming us out. And I hope things get better.
Yep.
And
Dylan tells me they're not going to, as far as theater goes.
I don't think so.
I'll be the hopeful one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
So wait. So you're telling me there's a chance?
And with that, I think we've come to the end. So yeah, thank you guys for listening to the Very Refreshing Podcast. We appreciate it. And, you know, we're just going to keep this going. These are just fun discussions that we have.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I'm getting a little bit wrapped up in like, oh man, we fudged this, or we didn't talk about this. But I'm the more we do it, the more I'm realizing that it's the point of it.
Yeah.
You know, like, I kind of dig it. Yeah,
same. And I think if we, there's plenty of room for us to revisit topics and go into more detail on them.
But we need to like really build it first.
Yeah, you're right.
Like we gotta.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what the point of these first few episodes are. Is like us practicing if there's ever something that we feel like we really missed and we want to do again, we can do them in the future.
We might do a whole episode about Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure that would happen eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
or
a whole episode about the Stooges.
Yeah. If we get the right kind of feedback from listeners, if we end up loving it enough, which I'm loving it so far, but if we end up loving it enough past this initial run, yeah, we'll do episodes where we get more in detail, and it'll probably be the same kind of loosey-goosey discussion. We'll just have more dedicated time to certain subjects.
Yeah, and to be clear, this episode is not like a comprehensive history of comedy
Definitely
either.
Not.
It was just, I don't know, we're just chatting, right? So we will see you guys next week, where we will talk about making the band.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we're going to talk about music next week.
Next week is music.
So Alec brought up boy bands, I think, was it the last episode?
Yep.
So we get to flesh out a little bit of Alec's dreams in terms of music.
I hope so.
And some of the things I was able to do. And but thank you so much for listening, guys. We're having an absolute blast. We are more than halfway through the season right now. We're doing a 12-episode season. And just like the theaters, there's no certainty of it continuing on long term. So like the theaters, enjoy the podcast while you got it.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care now. Bye then.
Thank you for checking out the Very Refreshing Podcast. Subscribe for more content just like this.